He's John Timpane.
And he's Don Rooney.
And this is
The Musical Innertube.
Now, you may ask, why is this podcast called The Musical Innertube?
And we may reply, because that's its name, of course.
Now, how did this podcast get that name?
Back in college, we hosted a radio show. Once, we tried to introduce a soothing musical interlude.
Instead, we messed up and wound up introducing a soothing musical innertube, and the name stuck.
So here we are, hundreds of years later, still talking
to interesting people about their interesting lives.
Difference makers who really make a difference.
The 95th Academy Awards are almost with us, kicking off on the evening of March the 12th. Here to talk about the nominations, the controversies, and the Oscars' attempts to stay hip and relevant is Sam Adams. Sam is a senior editor at Slate and a film, TV, and music writer for Rolling Stone, IndieWire, the Los Angeles Times, and the Philadelphia Inquirer. He has 20 years of experience writing criticism and features for print and web. Welcome to the Musical Innertube, Sam.
Hi, thanks for having me, guys.
So let's start in with the Best Pictures, which is a good place to start. I'm wondering what you think about the nominations and whether there were some that they missed and some that shouldn't be on there.
There are always some that they missed, but I have to say this is, about as good a crop of Best Picture nominations as I remember in recent years. I will admit I've still not seen All Quiet on the Western Front. I can't quite bring myself to do that. But of the other 9 here, there's no, even the movies that I don't particularly like, I would not be upset if they won. So there's really, there's not a real, juicy Oscar night catastrophe in the works here. My favorite movie is probably not going to win, but I'm not unduly upset in advance about any of the possibilities.
What's your favorite?
I said that without actually having picked one, but it's probably Banshees of Inisherin or Triangle of Sadness, I think, are my 2 faves of this group.
I was looking over the list, and I'm looking. Top Gun made a lot of money, and Avatar: The Way of Water was the big spectacle, and The Fabelmans is Spielberg's personal memoir sort of thing. But out of all of those, I think that Everything Everywhere All at Once, even though it kind of had a weird sort of topic, is still shot a lot like an intimate movie, and that might have the inner road to, especially with that cast, to get it at the Best Picture award.
Yeah, I mean, one thing that's always good to take into account is that, and this is still true, less true than it was a couple of years ago, because the Academy has sort of greatly enlarged its membership in the last 5 or 6 years. Slowed down a little bit now, but they're sort of settling in at about 10,000 members, which is close to twice what it used to be. And they added a lot of people in the sort of international and what's called sort of the below the line areas, basically the people you don't see on screen. But it's still true, nonetheless, that actors are the largest voting branch of the Academy. And the 2 movies that they just based on the nominees for things like the Screen Actors Guild Awards, the 2 movies of the Best Picture nominees that they really, really like are Everything Everywhere All at Once and Banshees of Inisherin. I think both of which are nominated in all 4 acting categories.
Right.
So, a movie like Avatar, for example, is, the Academy as a whole, they love, it's a hugely successful movie, even more than one might have expected from, the latest Jim Cameron movie. But it is not, thing an actor looks at and thinks that is what I want to do. This shows off, the best of my craft. So in Banshees and Everything are movies that do that. And I think that actors, for obvious reasons tend to gravitate towards that stuff. And just based on what's been, winning so far, it seems like as much as they like, Banshees, and hopefully it might, pull out a win or 2 in the acting categories, but it seems like they're very, as a group, sort of more behind, Everything Everywhere All at Once, which has, great performances, long overdue recognition for someone like Michelle Yeoh, a great comeback story for Kiwi Kwan, who was essentially out of the acting business, although not the film business, because he was working for Wong Kar-wai as an assistant director and a production executive and things. But he was, basically off screen for 2 or 3 decades and comes back with this incredible story and this great role. And that's very hard for anyone to resist, but I think actors especially.
It's interesting to me that there are a lot of, in this crop of movies, a lot of close shot movies. I mean, Banshees of Inisherin, a lot of close shots of people being very upset. And as Don said, Everything Everywhere All at Once, although it is the spectacular sort of special effects film, it's also, you can boil it down to a mother-daughter film. You know, there does seem to be a marked preference for intense personal pictures this year. And even though you do have, actually, now that I think about it, even Top Gun, which I detested the first one, and I really hate the second one too. But that one gets intimate as well, about, you know, the old guy coming back and trying to earn his creds and finding love, maybe. So, I mean, I'm wondering about that intense sort of close shot thing this year.
Yeah, I'm just looking over the list. I mean, I think that's just off the top of my head. It seems like you could sort of split it down 50-50. You're talking about, sort of character intimacy and things like that. I mean, there are, I wouldn't say that about Avatar. No. Or Elvis, or yeah. But I mean, the Oscars have sort of somewhat infamously. Well, I think it's not actually quite accurate to say that they have tended towards smaller movies in recent years. It is more that the movies that they have always tended towards have got smaller. This is sort of a big hobby horse of mine, but I really, people say, oh, the Oscars have become, so obscure. They don't, the movie, and this is absolutely, for one thing, not true. This year, between them, Avatar and Top Gun Maverick made like, $4 billion in the worldwide box office. These are not niche movies at all. And some of them are, but not, as Elvis made over $100 million domestic. Everything Everywhere made close to that. It's a pretty populist bunch. But it is also just that the movies that the Oscars have always liked have become, much less significant at the box office. And I know that you can really hold the Oscars accountable for that. I mean, one of my favorite sort of facts to pull out is that if you just, run the numbers through inflation, Ordinary People, from 1980 made I think $500 or $600 million in current, 2023 dollars or something. So it's not, they've always liked these sort of intimate, dramatic, character-driven movies. It's just grown-ups don't want to see them in movie theaters anymore.
Yeah, is that a reason that comedy has not done well in Best Picture winning? Is that comedies tend to be they're about character, but not in the same way that they're not because they haven't. They I don't even know why.
I mean, one of the ways I think about the Oscars is, these are. These are trade awards, right? These are the awards that the movie industry gives to itself. So this is, no different than if you went to a, plumbing expo and they put out these are our new pipes. These are the 2023 plungers that we have for next year. These are the best thing. This is the movie industry saying this is what we do. This is the best of us that we want to put forward. And that is often, a movie that makes a ton of money. But it is also sometimes, a movie like, Moonlight or 12 Years a Slave, where it's this is, we can also do this too. The comic book blockbusters will take care of themselves. We don't need to remind people that we do this, but we want to point out that we can make, art that touches people deeply and puts stories on the screen that haven't been there before. It's the stuff that, it's like if, the Hollywood went to their high school reunion and someone asked them, what do you do? This is the stuff they'd lead with. So, and the comedies just, I think they're wrong here, but they've just always, they've always seemed, more fun, more frivolous, not as, sort of serious and, first thing out of your mouth as the dramas. And, that's, unfortunate, but it is also, by, any standard, not a great era for theatrical studio comedy at the moment, for sure.
Paraphrase, I guess, comedy is hard, but drama will get you the Oscar. Something like that. How much did streaming cut into the not just the Best Picture nominations, but all movie watching this year. Most of them simultaneously streamed and went to the theaters or went to streaming very quickly after the theaters. How much does streaming cut into what we're talking about with awards films?
I mean, it's hard because you're talking about sort of multiple nested counterfactuals at the same time. I mean, because we're dealing not only with streaming, we're dealing with the pandemic, which is still, very much going on, although movie theaters are open now. I mean, the overall box office this year rebounded pretty well, thanks in large part, specifically to Maverick and Avatar: The Way of Water. So that, if you look at the box office top 10 for 2022, for example, like the top movies are not so far off, from what they were. And in fact, in the new Avatar movie, I mean, you have the fourth highest grossing movie in history. So it is certainly possible for a movie to do really well. Top Gun made a pretty good chunk of $1 billion as well.
Yeah.
If you look at the bottom of the top 10, it is not where it was 4 years ago. Like the drop off is really steep. And, one of the things that happened this fall is, fall is traditionally when distributors kind of roll out their Oscar awards as the movies that, they sort of adult audiences, especially sort of older moviegoers who are more, still actually want to see movies in theaters. Those are the ones they tend to come out for. And this year, for movies like The Fabelmans and Tar, they just didn't. They were, the Fabelmans Steven Spielberg has had, I think, the two lowest grossing movies of his career in the last couple of years. Obviously for West Side Story, the pandemic had a lot to do with that. But Fabelmans is like just not, possibly a movie that people wanted to see in the theater, but also I think what happened is that older sort of core art house film audience is, I think, maybe more worried about COVID than people a couple decades younger than them, and just did not come out for these movies the way they have in the past. And movies like Triangle of Sadness, movies like The Menu actually did really well. And a movie like Glass Onion, the Knives Out sequel, which was sort of a really weird release thing where they only put it in like 700 or 800 theaters for a week and then took it off, and then it went on Netflix in a month. But that was like selling out screenings all over the place. And these are all movies where the audience skews kind of younger that I think, has most of their appeal to moviegoers in their 20s and 30s. And they are back. They want to see movies in theaters, not every movie, but some movies for sure. And then the movies, like Tar, which is about, classical music, and The Fabelmans, which I think, to have appeal, to pull people in, really, you have to have sort of an emotional investment in Spielberg's, the whole arc of his career. The idea of him making an autobiographical movie about his childhood has to strike some kind of chord in you, which means you've probably been living with Spielberg movies for a few decades. And that audience is just, it also, like Elvis is a movie that did tremendously well in theaters. But movies like Tar and The Fabelmans, just laid an egg at the box office. And so one of the reasons they went to streaming so quickly, is because they just completely fell flat in movie theaters. And it was like, well, maybe somebody's going to see them somewhere, but they're definitely not seeing them. They're not going to buy tickets.
In the end, who goes to see movies for all of the, polls and, we do have a lot of data about it. Sometimes there's that element of mystery, there's why people don't go to see a movie that turns out to be pretty good. I loved what you said about All Quiet on the Western Front. The reason I have the same hesitation that you do, but I have a second one, which is that I love the original so much. I don't want to see a remake. I love the 1930 Lumière's version. To me, it's one of the, it's a 1930 movie, and everything that you can say about the clunky state of the technology at the time, and yet it seems to be one of the greatest anti-war films ever. And I just don't want to see a remake, even though I've heard this is excellent. I guess I'll have to tiptoe off and see that at some point and maybe get a bunch of hankies, because it's going to be sad, but evidently at least in Europe, it's getting rave reviews. Here, it's gotten a few.
Yeah. And that's one that, just to go back to the streaming thing, that was a Netflix original movie, and it had, some sort of token, theatrical release. But like, I don't know, a few dozen theaters or something. I mean, it was designed to be seen on Netflix, and that's where the vast majority of people have seen it.
Could viewers, keep up with all of these different ways of releasing product? I mean, do they keep up? Do they follow it? I'm just interested in that.
It's interesting. I sort of recently started a Substack, and one of the pieces I wrote about there, which is I call this sort of "What's on tonight" or "Why nobody knows when anything is anymore." I, as you know, John, sort of came up through alt weeklies, writing for the Philadelphia City paper, and alt weeklies were really organized around you would pick up a Philly Weekly on Wednesday or City paper on Thursday, and then you would make your plan for the weekend. And the week you say, like, what's coming up, what movies are opening, what bands are going to be here, what's the museums, the galleries, and they were hugely listings driven. And they died out for a whole bunch of reasons. And I don't feel like that function has been replaced in a way. I find it like a friend of mine, what started me thinking about this is at the end of last year, a friend of mine was coming into Philly for a weekend. It was like, hey, you're like a cool music guy. Like what band should I go see this weekend? And just finding out what shows were taking place on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday was impossible. There's no place to do that now. And so, with a movie like Glass Onion, people were, why would a normal person know that this movie that was on 2,500 a sequel to a movie that was on, 2,500, 3,000 screens is only being opened on 600, for 7 days over the Thanksgiving weekend, and then going away for 3 weeks until it ends up on Netflix. Why would anyone know that? Why should anyone have to know that? This is not information that a normal person should have to carry around in their head in order to see a movie. But it's, because the old ways of putting things out there have really been destroyed for a whole host of reasons. And now it becomes this very, sort of complicated process. I write for Slate now, as you mentioned, John, and we had a meeting in, I think, October of the culture department. We were sort of talking about hey, what should we cover? And someone was like, oh, should we do something about women talking? And someone was like, oh, hasn't that been out forever? That just sort of feels like old news. And I and a couple of people who handle the movie coverage had to be actually doesn't come out till Christmas. It was 2 months before it was out, but because it had been at Toronto, it had been at, other festival or New York Film Festival, had been written about so much, it just felt like it had already come and gone. And it was 2 months away from when almost anyone, at that point, the number of people who had seen it in the world was maybe in 5 digits, probably the high 4. And it felt like it was already over before it started. And it's probably why things it's not nominated for a ton of Oscars, but it is just, people don't have the sort of bandwidth, I used to, and I'm, some of this is just, I'm I'm 20 years older than I was 20 years ago as well. So it's, some of that is just me changing, but I don't, have, the lists of stuff to watch and the, I keep calendars, lots and lots of calendars for work, but then I miss the things that I don't follow for work. I was like, oh, that Facebook's telling me that this band that I love was in town 3 days ago. So I think that happens with movies a ton, and it just becomes a real challenge to keep up with anything that the algorithm isn't throwing in our face every time we turn on our Apple TV.
Especially if you want to have the experience of a big screen. There are some movies like that you'd rather see in a large movie theater. And, you can watch it on television, but often, I've had the experience of wanting to find a screen that'll be thrown on, even if it's wall size, I don't care.
Right.
And I just sometimes cannot do it. It's really hard. Around here, that's partly because around me, a lot of the big theaters have shut down. Some of them are holding on, but it's still, it means I can't really find, that kind of movie unless I'm way ahead of the curve. So it's interesting, Sam, maybe you could do it. Maybe you're the guy to do this. Ladies and gentlemen, Sam Adams, this is your new thing you're going to do. Tell everybody how to find those movies. I don't want to put you on the spot, of course.
Well, no, I actually had friends who tried to do something like that in Los Angeles. And I think partly is because they moved to the Midwest. But they were also saying hey, we tried to do this sort of screen, movie listing, series there. And it just was it was like pulling teeth just to get theaters to tell us like when they were showing stuff.
Yes.
And I remember, when I worked at the newspaper, like it was always like, we went to press Wednesday morning, and it was always like a nail biter, like Tuesday night, if we were going to get the facts, because this was the facts era. If we were going to get the facts from like this or that movie theater with their show times, and it's apparently not gotten any better trying to like pry this information out of places so you can advertise their stuff for free.
Right.
Yeah. And another layer of get off my lawn-ism. I remember when John and I were in college, that was something that we could do to plan the weekend. The entertainment sections of most newspapers were huge, and 80% of it was ads for what was playing in the movie theaters at that point. So you could sit down and figure out which movies were playing where and what the times were, and figure out what you were going to do that weekend. And newspapers, as you guys can attest, aren't there anymore and can't do that anymore.
Well, and also is like if you missed something, you could probably see it like next month. Whereas
this is true too.
The window is like you got to fly through that window like Tom Cruise in a F-15 Tomcat or something.
Yes, and it used to be that movies would run as long as the proprietor wanted to run them. I remember we got to see The Producers about 2 months after it had been released. And we found one little tiny theater in Anaheim, and us and all our friends piled into a car. It just got there just to see but that was because the guy liked the movie. We found this out later that the proprietor, he said, yeah, I know my license sort of ran out a week ago, but they're not going to care if I give them some more money for running it. We'll return to our podcast in just a moment. But first, here's a soothing musical interlude.
Sam Adams has more than 20 years of experience writing film, music, and TV criticism.
He's a senior editor at Slate and a contributing writer to Rolling Stone, the Los Angeles Times, IndieWire, and the Philadelphia Inquirer.
He's also appeared in places such as Entertainment Weekly, the Boston Globe, Salon, the Hollywood Reporter, and he's a member of the New York Film Critics Circle and the National Society of Film Critics.
And now we return you to the musical Innertube already in progress.
Well, I was just wondering about something that, I've heard about a lot with the Academy Awards, and that is kind of splitting. For example, Tar is up for Best Picture. And as you said, it's kind of an exclusive picture. It's not for everybody. It's classical music. On the other hand, Cate Blanchett apparently does a terrific job in it and is up for Best Actress. So is that one of those things where like Spielberg's movie won't get a nod for Best Picture, but they may give him the director nod just sort of, because of everything, is that sort of in play when we're talking about mixing and matching the awards?
I mean, it usually is. The thing is like we're recording this, the weekend after, or the Monday after rather, the PGA Producers Guild and the SAG Awards, the Actors Guild Awards were just this weekend. And it does not seem like they are inclined to spread the wealth at the moment. They are not, foolproof as an Oscar bellwether. But everything everywhere got like all the acting awards. At the SAGs. All the ones that it was up for. And including like Jamie Lee Curtis for supporting actress. And Michelle Yeoh and Kiwi Kwan, that movie won best picture at the Producers Guild. It seems like there was a lot of enthusiasm for all those performances individually as well as collectively. I'm definitely pulling for other people in some of those categories. I would be perfectly happy for Michelle Yeoh to win for Best Actress. I'm really pulling for Colin Farrell in Banshees of Inisherin, who now seems like I think he's like moved into maybe third place at this point. It's kind of a bummer after Austin Butler and Brendan Fraser have picked up some precursors. And but the way things are going right now, it does not seem like a split ticket is super likely. But it is, I mean, there's still more to come, and that has historically been how the Oscars have liked to do it. They might, for example, choose to give Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner screenplay for The Fabelmans, although it's unlikely, I think, to win anything else. But Everything Everywhere is clearly very beloved in a great many different branches of the Academy. And it's not a movie that you can say like, it's really well directed, but then the writing's kind of so-so, or like, the writing's great and the directing's great, but the performances, I don't know, like it really sort of files on all cylinders. And even though, as I said, it's not my favorite of the movies in play here, I think it is, it is the whole thing kind of works together at the same level. So it is not surprising to me that people who like the movie like all the component parts of it as well as the whole.
One category that I've always really been interested in, just because every year it seems to be a category one could love, is supporting actress. And I just love all the performances in that particular category. I just think they have all been great. In many cases, much better than the lead actress, who is also sometimes also tabbed for a nomination. What do you think about this year's crop of supporting actresses? I mean,
it's often one of the toughest categories for me. This year, I like some of these actors a lot. Like Angela Bassett, I think, is still the favorite for her performance in Black Panther 2. And I think that's a fine performance. I don't think it is anything against her as an actor. I just don't think she has like a ton to do. In that movie, I also think Hong Chow is very good in The Whale. She was in like 4 different movies last year, and you could almost, pick any one of them. This is, I don't think, I don't think the material is there for her to give sort of the best of these performances. Carrie Condon in Banshees of Inisherin, I love. That's just,
I just thought she was wonderful.
No, I do love it. And Stephanie Hsu in Everything Everywhere All at Once is great as well. Gets to do some really kind of out there fun stuff with that, but then also sort of more, straightforward mother-daughter drama, and I think handles all that stuff really well.
Let's talk about watching in the other direction. The Oscars have not necessarily been, no award show really has been in the rating stratosphere on television much in the last 10 or 12 years almost. It seems like every year you come out, the numbers are down a little bit, not the most watched or the 18th most watched or something like that. I want to say something really crass and commercial, like, are the Oscars relevant anymore? Especially when it comes to TV ratings.
Yeah, I'm certainly not when they come to TV ratings. I mean, TV ratings are, and it is very bizarre to me that the Oscars institutionally, particularly in the last few years, have been making all these sort of radical and often, pretty ill-advised changes in an attempt to goose the live TV ratings. And they failed every time, and often ended up, totally embarrassing themselves. Like a couple of years ago when they, rejiggered the order to put Best Actor last because they assumed that the late Chadwick Boseman was going to win that. And then it went to Anthony Hopkins, who was not even there because he had, couldn't, take a COVID test in time or something. So they were just sort of like, hey, Anthony Hopkins won. Great. Good night, everybody. So
tip your waitress on the way out.
I mean, live TV ratings are down for everything. I recently saw a list of I don't think it was like the 100 most viewed, events of TV last year in live television, and 80 of them were sporting events or award shows. I mean, it's just, people don't watch live TV anymore. So of course the live TV ratings for the Oscars are down because they're down for everything except the Super Bowl. I feel like the Academy should take the position that this is, the Oscar is, to one up you in craftsmanship here. The Oscar is, I think, the strongest brand in the awards space. I think Oscar means something that, Emmy or Grammy or Tony or any of these other words don't mean. I think the Oscar is really kind of the gold standard of winning it's, maybe the Nobel Prize can compete
Yes.
with it. But other than that, everybody knows what winning an Oscar means. And the Academy Awards are, the biggest sort of branding event for the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. So the fact that they're not, they've also been sort of their big cash cow to make all the money for the, a lot of the great work that they do the rest of the year involving, supporting emerging filmmakers and restoring film history and running their new museum, all of which is great. And obviously they need money to do those things, but I think they have been really kind of disgracing, what is supposed to be the industry's sort of premier showcase in order to run after that completely inachievable goal. You can't, turn back the clock and, make especially younger generations who just don't watch things live on TV interested in live TV, certainly in watching it on a television set in a way that Nielsen ratings are going to record. They're going to, stream it online or find the clips on, YouTube or TikTok or whatever after the fact. And you just have to reconcile yourself to that. You can't, and the movie industry as a whole is, has been adjusting to that people are not watching the way they used to. And the Oscars needs to get with that program as well.
It used to be, too, that the Oscars would then lead to more commercial success afterwards. If you were an Oscar-winning picture, you could put that on your ads, and more people would come to see that picture after the Oscars came out. But with the what we were talking about earlier, the weird schedules and not putting as much in the theaters as streaming, does that even count anymore to generate more revenue for these pictures?
I'm just sort of doing this off the top of my head. My understanding is that, when people have gone and tried to do really kind of, quantitative research about the Oscar bump, it has never been that huge a thing, provides some sort of uplift, and certainly kind of puts, movies on more people's radar. But, it is not, you don't end up making another $100 million because you won Best Supporting Actor. So it's great for people's careers. It is good for the industry as a whole. Obviously, it brings people to these movies sort of individually and collectively. It's not clear that probably the most significant thing that happens, is, when an actor wins an Oscar, they can raise their quote, they get one project to get greenlit after that they might not have otherwise.
It's interesting because, there are other awards that do mean something within that world of the award. For example, getting best, musical, on Broadway will bring people to see you. And the funny part about it is that a lot of these movies have already made their billions, right? They've already got, do they want more? Is that what they want? I got an Oscar, now I want another billion. It almost seems as though this would be best for the smaller pictures on the list or the performances people haven't had a chance to see. And I guess that's not true either.
Yeah. It does some help for them. And I think particularly for the movies that are completely off people's radar, some of the documentary or international film nominees, it's a big boost for them. I think the least grossing movie of the Best Picture nominees is Women Talking. I don't think even that's going to see a huge, or has seen certainly a huge bump from that.
Last question, Sam. In the last few years, we've seen Oscars so white and the criticism of not enough women directors, et cetera, et cetera. Do you see with the nomination list this year a change in any of that? Is there more inclusion going on?
This is not the best year in terms of, this I mentioned the sort of big inclusiveness push that the Academy has made over the last, I think it's maybe 7 years now. I think 2016 was when they put out the report, which at that point the Oscars were 80% male and 90% white or something like that. They added thousands more members since then. They have become definitely more diverse in terms of race and gender, but also in terms of, as I mentioned before, where people are from, both in terms of nationality and also what part of the business they're from. many people have noted, for example, this year that there are no women nominated for director. That in fact one that was on people's wish list this year was Gina Prince Bythewood for The Woman King, which got basically shut out across the board, and Black woman has never been nominated for Best Director. So it is not a sort of uniformly white and male spectrum here. And Everything Everywhere, which seems likely to win, majority of this awards, is of course like a entirely Asian American cast, co-written, co-directed by Daniel Kwan. So we have not sort of reverted to the bad old days, but this is not. This is also not their best year in a lot of ways to point out some of that stuff, and particularly some of the omissions have stung, like Viola Davis getting left out of, and Daniel Deadwyler for Till getting left out of Best Actress, stuff like that. Those have really those have hit pretty hard. So yeah, well, I would not say not an A+ this year.
Well, thank you, Sam. A grade from you sticks in a lot of people's minds, and certainly I always pay attention to what you have to say about what's going on in the filmic world. So thank you for joining us for a very bright and brilliant half hour. We appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Sam.
Thanks a lot, John. Thanks, Don.
And thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
The Musical Innertube is available everywhere good podcasts are found. Listen on your favorite platform and give us a good rating.
You can subscribe to the podcast on our website, musicalinnertube.com.
There you can listen to all of our podcasts, see pictures and biographies of our guests, and contact us. You can even leave us a voicemail.
And don't forget to leave your email address on our Talk to the Two page on the website, and we'll send you a preview of who's coming to talk with us by email, just so you're prepared.
That's musicalinnertube.com.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.